Everyone, thank you for joining. XION, Particle Network, Orb Labs, Future of Chain Abstraction. We have some heavy hitters here today, and really excited because I know I've been on a panel with you, Tabasco, in Austin, Texas, but Rich, I think this is our first time speaking. And it's nice that what I could imagine is we all have very similar ideas in mind of the future. And the good thing about chain abstraction, at least in my mind, is it's extremely composable and interoperable. And so it's exciting to be able to kind of sit up here and be able to work with such awesome people like you guys. So, I mean, without further ado, Tabasco, you want to introduce yourself? And then Rich, you want to introduce yourself?
For sure. Yeah, so
Cool.
my name is Tabasco. Of course, it's not my real name. My real name is Ethan. I do developer relations at Particle Network. So I handle most of our more technically facing things. So all of our documentation, as well as a lot of kind of the talks that we do and stuff like that. And so previously, I did developer relations at an RPC provider for a long time, and then I joined Particle, I guess, a little bit over a year ago at this point. So the kind of quick TLD on Particle is that we are our official tagline is the L1 unifying all chains to universal accounts. Essentially, this just means that we produce this kind of core product called universal accounts, which is sort of an evolution of account abstraction that you might typically find within EVM chains that allows you to basically have one balance that you could hold across all chains. So if you deposit ETH on Arbitrum or ETH on BNB chain or any token on any chain, essentially you can use that collectively across the ecosystem. So essentially using universal accounts, you remove the notion of distinctive chains and you unify your identity across the ecosystem. So this is essentially how universal accounts work, abstracting away blockchains at the account level. And we're going to get a little bit more into this later, but that's a kind of brief TLD on Particle as well as myself.
Awesome. Cool. Thank you. Rich, you wanna take the reins here?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm Rich, one of the co-founders of Orb Labs. And our official tagline is the first chain abstraction provider, but that tends to fly over a few heads. So I guess a more succinct way to think about us is we're building infrastructure that enables applications and wallets, any application or wallet, to become chain abstracted with as little as 5 lines of code. Um, how the system works on the very fundamental level is Ethan mentioned that he sort of like left an RPC provider. We essentially sort of worked our way into becoming an RPC provider slash proxy that sort of takes on the responsibility for aggregating and orchestrating accounts. And by doing so, we can sort of like make it possible for any account to become chain abstracted with a very simple integration. Yeah, and going back to Basky's point on views, I'm sure we'll end up with very similar views on many things, and I'm happy to hear to discuss a bit more.
Awesome. Cool. Yeah, I mean, I appreciate that. And, it's always great seeing both of you guys so much on the timeline. And, the narrative of chain abstraction is really heating up, which I'm sure we all enjoy. But, maybe before we even get into everything, I mean, Tabasco, you want to take it? And then Rich, just what does chain abstraction mean to you? How do you guys define chain abstraction?
Yeah, so this is a good question. I think this is something that the ecosystem at large has struggled with finding, I guess, social consensus around for quite a while. I think chain abstraction, at least there's even like within Web3 overall, has always been kind of understood as slightly different things. Some people consider it like an intent-based way to kind of like remove distinctive chains, and people see it as kind of like a broader thing where you're like removing chains from just the user's perceptions. Some people see it as like even broader than that, like actually removing all complexity from end users. And so we've thought a lot about like how do you actually define chain abstraction, and how do you provide like a more formal way of looking at it. And we actually produced an article about this quite a while ago, where we basically gave chain abstraction the definition of this kind of general idea that first of all, chain abstraction is a user experience. And we found that, I believe it was Everclear that originally said this, and we like this, that chain abstraction can ultimately be understood as, at least in our opinion, as a user experience, and specifically a user experience that is exempt from the manual processes that are typically required for kind of interacting across chains. So bridging and managing different balances and managing different walls, et cetera. These are processes that are quite difficult for end users and complex to the degree where it makes onboarding into Web3 and using Web3 quite it gives a pretty high barrier to entry. So this is ultimately what chain abstraction aims to solve, which is removing all the complexity and the friction associated with interacting manually with distinctive chains to a degree where, I mean, ideally the end result of this is an experience where users can interact across the ecosystem without necessarily needing to know what chain that they're on, right? So this is the experience that I think we all want to get to. There's a debate on like perception and whether users should know what chain they're on and all this kind of stuff. But I think ultimately, and I believe it was also Everclear who said this, the goal should be that users should have a degree of abstraction where they really don't need to know what chain that they're on. So they automatically have their balances available everywhere. Applications themselves can compose across any app and chain to a point where they're intrinsically chain agnostic. And we arrive at this ecosystem where users are chain agnostic, so they're universally applicable across the entire ecosystem. Their balances are everywhere, their accounts are everywhere, so they aren't siloed to one specific chain. And developers can build applications that follow the same property, where they are chain agnostic in nature. They can really kind of see the entire ecosystem. They can service the entire ecosystem, interact with the entire ecosystem. This is going to change the entire dynamic of Web3, in our opinion, where the whole incentive structure for how builders build applications changes, how users discover applications and onboard applications changes, because all of a sudden, like, there's no competition between ecosystems. Users are no longer a scarce resource that are siloed to certain ecosystems, and developers have a lot more flexibility in the applications that they create. So I think this is going to be really exciting, and I think that the kind of experience of, or this like chain abstraction experience, is going to become the default for every user, ideally like just within a year. This is the future that we see. So this is kind of how we define chain abstraction, as an experience exempt from the manual processes typically required to interact with multiple chains.
Nice. Rich, what about you?
I
What do you think
think
about it?
I have a much shorter explanation. But the core idea here is basically the ability for users to leverage all their accounts and assets to interact with any application on any chain seamlessly. Um, and I think this is actually perhaps one of the more controversial takes we have at Word Labs. We're not entirely convinced that the underlying chains will disappear completely. And the reason for this is because there is a huge part of crypto that is tethered to the security of the underlying chain. So in many ways, we do think that over time, um, with the emergence of app chains and as chain abstraction becomes more prevalent, we're probably going to see a world where applications and their respective underlying chains look very similar to the way that we currently view URLs for websites. You can look at a URL and think immediately like, hey, this site looks sketchy because something is off. And it's probably going to be something very similar where folks are going to be cognizant of the chain to some degree, just enough to determine the underlying security of the chain and whether their funds are safe. But they won't be cognizant enough to know, okay, this chain runs on this VM, uses this gas token, and has this asset with this particular address in this form. It's more so going to be, I just wake up, connect applications I want to use, and just use them, because the infrastructure I'm using in most cases, being primarily the wallet and the applications, are capable of helping me get to them and use them successfully from any part of the internet. And yeah, that's the general idea we have for chain abstraction.
Nice. No, I mean, I think that's kind of awesome, and I think, to kind of move forward, maybe Rich, you could start and then go to Tabasco. How is Orb Lab, sorry, kind of pushing that, and then how is Particle Network kind of pushing that view?
Yeah, I think we share a lot of similarities in the overall overarching view with Particle, actually. Going back to the idea that we think the most successful place to sort of like put most of the complexities around chain abstraction is definitely on the account level. So in our case, our core product, which is Orbi, comes in the form of, as I mentioned before, an RPC endpoint that can sort of like give any wallet or application chain abstraction. Um, and the main way, sort of like the main sort of angle we're going for chain abstraction is through user wallets. The only difference between us and I guess a lot of different players in the space, including Particle, is we're not giving you a new account. We're basically operating with the assumption that existing players in this space, existing wallets, existing custodial tools, will eventually also want to offer chain abstraction. And in many cases, they may not want to migrate to new forms of infrastructure. And to sort of like appeal to those customers, we're building tooling that makes it possible for the existing accounts to become chain abstracted. And yeah, all of this happens through, as I've mentioned before, this middle layer that takes on the responsibility for unifying, aggregating, and orchestrating across account states. And by doing so, you get to do exactly what Tabasco said, which is get rid of the manual processes engaged in manual processes related to interacting with applications across different chains, because something else is sort of like bearing that weight. And yeah, that's basically the core idea and how we're sort of going about chain abstraction. I mean, the Orbi agent is basically doing all of that for the customer.
Nice, that's awesome. What about you, Tabasco? Want to dig into how Particle is working on clarifying this vision?
Yeah, so we definitely do take kind of more of the new account thesis, which I would say is probably like, I think fundamentally in terms of the vision, ourself or labs and many of the other kind of more account focused organizations in the vertical kind of have very similar and justifiable goal of like, how do you give users essentially at the account level the ability to um, you know be chain agnostic in a sense and have a balance that can be used everywhere. Of course, we take this approach of more at the account abstraction point, where we essentially use smart accounts, which we kind of evolve into this idea of universal accounts. The main distinction is that universal accounts are coordinated by our chain to have these kind of like seamless cross-chain transactions and have state that's managed across chains and kind of more technical, complicated stuff. But in essence, the idea behind a universal account is that this is ultimately an account that can be bound to any existing wallet, any social login, et cetera, that a user can leverage to deposit funds in any chain and use these funds in any chain. So we kind of use this term or this phrase of one account, one balance, any chain, and that's ultimately what you can do with universal accounts. Is deposit anywhere and use it anywhere. And the way that we do this is basically by, whenever you have funds you want to use somewhere, we kind of use a system of what we call universal liquidity in the background to make these funds available everywhere, so we can automatically do bridging transactions and routing across chains, similar to Orb Labs and many other players. We use kind of we don't call it like a full intent system. It's like a pseudo intent system where, we essentially use fillers that confront the transaction and stuff like this, a little bit in the details. But at the essence of kind of how we contribute to chain abstraction is at the account level. And now we see chain abstraction overall, maybe I think we're going to get into it later, in regards to like how chain abstraction is composed. We actually see it as being a larger picture than just the account level. And so we don't see our solutions necessarily exhaustive of like implementing chain abstraction, but specifically we kind of see universal accounts as one component of the larger picture of chain abstraction, which is specifically giving users access to kind of like a unified identity and universalized funds at specifically the account level with this kind of enhanced smart account. So that's what we do at Particle.
Awesome. And I know you guys kind of like, I know you guys work on this kind of multi-layer framework for, maybe someone from the audience who maybe hasn't read the pieces that you guys have put out. Maybe, why don't we dive into that multi-layer framework just on like a high level?
For sure, yeah. So, for some context, we've always looked at the chain abstraction vertical through this lens that it's kind of similar in nature to some degree, at least in our opinion, to like the modular vertical. So we kind of see chain abstraction as being implemented to a degree where it requires multiple solutions that have different points of the stack in mind in terms of what they're solving for and what they tend to achieve. Some solutions will do multiple points of the stack at the same time, and some solutions will just do one. So, for example, we're only account level, and then you have things like socket and agoric, which are at different points in the stack. But essentially, we kind of see chain abstraction as being achieved through three core layers that can work interoperably to essentially achieve this kind of full chain abstracted experience. And we use this term full chain abstraction experience to refer to an experience that really achieves chain abstraction at every point in a user's journey. So these three layers are the application layer. So actually giving developers the ability to create an intrinsically chain agnostic application, giving them the SDKs and the APIs to seamlessly orchestrate and coordinate transactions across chains. So this is a more granular, lower level implementation for developers to really create applications that are not bound to the confines of any single blockchain. That's the application layer. Some examples of this would be, like I mentioned, Socket, Agoric, even clusters, players like this. Orb Labs even has a product, as far as I understand. I'll let Rich share a little bit more, I guess. But if I know correctly, I think there's kind of a product there that fits within the stack as well, in terms of actually giving applications the power to be chain agnostic and implement chain abstraction. Then below this, you have the account level, which is where we sit. I know Orb Labs also sits in this area with their kind of more wallet-facing product. You see Near here and a few other players in terms of bringing chain abstraction to the more user-facing, the account level, right? So you can understand application level as being developer-centric. account level as being user centric. So actually giving users the ability to of course, be intrinsically chain agnostic and have this kind of unified balanced identity. And then you go a step below this, which is the blockchain level. And this is actually native intrinsic and interoperability at the blockchain level, which makes it easier for the aforementioned two levels, which is the application and the account, to actually achieve kind of cross-chain interoperability. So some examples of blockchain level chain abstraction is going to be like proof aggregation, like through AgLayer or Avail Nexus, or chain collectives like superchains, stuff like this. Not necessarily a required component for like actually achieving chain abstraction, but it definitely is a component of doing it in like a full implementation. So this is kind of how we view the chain abstraction vertical, as really being quite a collaborative vertical that requires a lot of vertical collaboration in terms of achieving this full experience of chain abstraction. So we've done a lot of kind of content with Agoric and Cluster, and I think even the last article that we did had a lot of really good input from XION and I believe it was Sata Protocol and a few other guys, where we really want to push this idea that chain abstraction is a collaborative vertical that requires the interoperable usage of multiple solutions to really achieve this kind of deep integration. So this is at least the idea that we've been pushing for quite a long time, and that's why we introduced the multi-layer framework.
Nice. And then this goes to both of you. We'll start at Rich. What would you say is like your biggest contrarian take about the chain abstraction narrative?
Let me think of something that'll make my head roll.
You got something you can go off. I think I could probably take it first. I think that not everything needs to be considered chain abstraction. I think we've seen chain abstraction take the account abstraction conversation, the intent conversation, the entire bridging conversation, and somehow like the the data availability conversation, and then just kind of mashed it into one. That is my contrarian take about the word chain abstraction, that not everything needs to be chain abstraction.
I agree with that to some degree. I do remember there was a point where like all the messaging protocols were also calling themselves chain abstraction sort of like solutions. And I was like, I don't know if I buy that, right? Like it's like, hey, we've had like you guys have been around for like 2-3 years, and like we haven't gotten any closer to change being abstracted. So definitely there's something missing in this whole sort of like idea of you guys being the perpetrators of like chain abstraction. I think my main contrarian take would be I am to some degree. So I do think going back to Pascal's point that chain abstraction space is one that could be collaborative in many regards, where folks who sit on different layers of the stack can work together to achieve chain abstraction. And if you go look at even almost every single chain abstraction solution, whether you're working on the account or the application level, in most cases, they're working with some sort of like provider on the blockchain level, some messaging protocol or proof system to sort of like make your solution work. I guess my main contrarian take would be I think there also is room for sideways collaboration, which is something that sort of tends to get missed in translation, where people on the same layer can work together to make their systems better collectively. And again, given that everyone is in the same category on each of the layers, sometimes that gets lost. It feels like you're basically competing with others in the same category you're in. I guess the other contrarian take, which is also contrarian to what I just said, is I'm skeptical of the degree of collaboration that will actually happen between the layers. I think we're going to see a world where many people sort of like this is another interesting trend about chain abstraction. Many people building the space started building this space perhaps as much as a year ago, and so they ended up designing solutions that sort of like took into account the technology that existed a year ago.
That makes sense.
Yeah, most of which wasn't collaborative, right? And so like now they have solutions that sort of like kind of work, and there's no room to actually sort of like work with other people who built around the same time they were building. And so it's very possible, even though the whole system is one that can be very collaborative, we don't see that much of collaboration because most of the folks who are close to having live products have already built their solutions, take into account the solutions and tech that existed a year ago. But yeah, those are my two contrarian takes.
Love it. Tabasco, what about you? What's your contrarian take?
Yeah, I think Rich actually made two really good points that I want to highlight first. I think first of all, the kind of relationship between projects horizontally is quite interesting, and I do think that this is something that maybe is less like directly competitive than a lot of people might think. Like we've even at Particle thought about using Orbi Engine and one balance credible accounts, things like this, to enhance our own solution and kind of make these a little bit more just like strong beyond our own infrastructure. So like I think that it makes a lot of sense, that kind of outlook on it as well. So I definitely agree with that to a pretty large degree. As well as I think that definitely in terms of, and I guess like it's worth also in this case like defining collaboration. I think in terms of actual solutions themselves collaborating between each other, I think this is a little bit rarer than what you might find in terms of actual implementation. The way that I see it typically is that in terms of collaboration, it'll usually be like, I guess, unbeknownst or like not necessarily at the will of a lot of these protocols. Like, for example, you could have a cross usage of Particle or Orbi and a bunch of different application level solutions and a blockchain level solution, and not necessarily at the will of those solutions themselves, but more so at just the point of implementation. So what I mean by this is that essentially kind of the collaboration or like the cross usage will happen more so in terms of like how this actually gets implemented, rather than like these solutions actually intrinsically working with one another and being like, I guess like directly interoperable. I think that a lot of just application level solutions, stuff like this, will kind of hopefully at least work with some other solutions. Even some of them are like bound to smart accounts and other kind of mechanisms. But I think in general, it'll hopefully be primarily at the implementation level. But I do think that like forcing collaboration on both the vertical and the horizontal level sometimes is a little bit difficult, especially for people who have already built out full solutions that are just now going live, which I think there are a lot of organizations like that. So anyways, I think Rich made some good points there. And also maybe it's kind of boring, but I really like to, like, one of the things that I say all the time that maybe isn't that controversial to take anymore, but I think that like Burnt said, the chain abstraction term is almost, I think we're turning around a little bit, to be honest. I'll be a little optimistic. I'll say that like we're fixing it, but I think it's in recent times almost lost most of its meaning in terms of actually what it refers to and what it means in terms of the protocol. There's so many people that like are saying that they're doing chain abstraction, but they're not. I mean, they're doing messaging or they're doing cross chain or whatever it may be, and they're not doing chain abstraction. And this is such a, like, I think this is a problem that like as a vertical there needs to be some pushback with, and that like we've even I think within our definition article we wrote basically that like people shouldn't attach themselves to this name if they aren't immediately or like to a first or second degree like solving chain abstraction and achieving it. So like this is something that we have been also pushing quite a bit for, and I think it's quite important because as soon as like the chain abstraction term loses its meaning, it makes the vertical a little bit harder to move forward because you need some degree of at least loose consensus around what the term means and what everybody's building towards. And if you have a lot of dilution of that, then I think it makes that goal a little bit harder. So I think this is one quite important thing that as a vertical, I hope that we don't kind of reduce ourselves to. But I do think that we've been making a lot of progress as a vertical in terms of moving away from that a little bit. And I actually think that in recent times, we've kind of gotten closer to a more kind of a general understanding of really what are the confines of chain abstraction, what is it not. Although of course, I still think we have progress collectively. And then, so yeah, I think that in general, like chain abstraction is of course a very quickly growing narrative, and I think it has a lot of technical merits. But what I don't want to see is it grow into purely just a narrative and a buzzword that people kind of like throw on a thing. Is like, I think modular turned into that to some degree, and some other kind of narratives in the past. I think chain abstraction, what I'd like to see is it kind of exists as its own standalone idea that will continue to proliferate and actually like be materialized within the ecosystem. At least this is my opinion. I think this is actually the main reason why we produced a definition article kind of defining chain abstraction a little while ago, is because we wanted to try and help reduce that problem a little bit. And also this is why you have frameworks like the Cake framework and other kind of organizations that have produced somewhat rigid ways of looking at the vertical, which I think helps a lot in terms of reducing this and kind of giving people mental boundaries to understanding what is chain abstraction and what does not classify as chain abstraction.
I think that's awesome. I mean, how do you see, like, we've seen this play out in modularity. Where do you think that negative, what does that negative end game look like if chain abstraction were to kind of go there? Is that something that you can answer, Tabasco or Rich, anyone?
Yeah, I can start with that. I do think if it does happen, then chain abstraction become very similar to the way we currently think of bridges. So I'm not sure if most people here on the channel or chat were following, but like there's a period of time between like 2022 and 2023 where bridge just became like a slur for interop protocol,
Yep.
where you just mentioning you're a bridge, everyone would just freak out, and then like every interop protocol was finding some roundabout way to stop referring to themselves as bridges. And
You
even
would say
till date, you
mission
see it.
burn, and it would be like
Yeah,
everything's gone.
yeah, sort of, yeah, exactly, exactly. And then it sort of became one of those things where folks weren't even evaluating the system by its merits or demerits anymore. It's basically, hey, you just said you're a bridge, and we already know bridges are horrendous. Avoid at all cost. Um, that could be chain abstraction if things are sorted out properly. Um, we could get to a world where folks hear chain abstraction by default they assume like, yeah, you're either grifting or you're building something that's inconsequential to crypto space, which will be very unfortunate.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I feel like you see that a lot in this industry. Like, I mean, you definitely get some that are more than others. I think L2s, L3s, you kind of see this a lot with, which is L2s, L3s. You always get like, and then I think you get like the rehypothecations, right? Like RWAs used to be called synthetics, which used to be called tokenized securities, and there's always this kind of like new idea. And I think we're kind of seeing chain abstraction come out of intent and bridging, but I think you're then bringing more aspects into it. Tabasco, you wanna throw something in here?
No, I think both of you guys are totally right. I think that yeah, the future that I would like to avoid is kind of getting to a point where it's like modular, where you see a bunch of different projects that they are chain abstracted or they're chain abstraction or something like this, and they just add it because it gives them some narrative points or something. Because I mean that only lasts for so long until it's a worthless term and people don't really know what it means anymore. And then, like I said, as soon as this happens, it just makes it more difficult to actually achieve this kind of chain abstraction thesis overall. So I think that like this future is something that we definitely want to avoid, and I think this can really only happen through some degree of social consensus around what chain abstraction is, and like I said, like sort of vertical wide pushback against the misuse of the term and against protocols that just want to kind of bind it to things. So I think this is quite important, and should hopefully like what I hope is that I think chain abstraction is still, actually, to be honest, it's sometimes it feels a little bit larger than it is in terms of vertical. It's still a very small vertical, like all things considered. Like we were putting together this ecosystem map for our recent article, and we're like, man, there really aren't that many protocols building for chain abstraction. Like it's like protocols that are like specifically building for chain abstraction. It's a really small space, and as this expands, I think we're going to start to see more of this. But what I hope is that we'll kind of continue to be a little bit tight knit. I think that the chain abstraction space is, which I like this about this space, is that it is quite tight knit. Everybody knows everybody. Everybody kind of like talks in the same like two group chats basically, and it's just like, I mean, like there's a lot of good work being done in the chain abstraction vertical, and I hope it stays like this. I mean, of course, I'm sure it won't, but I think that more importantly, above all, that there needs to be some degree of kind of like retained conviction around when chain abstraction is used and actually how we define this as an industry, really. I think eventually the goal will be that like semantically like I think the definition and like how we understand chain abstraction, kind of like how we bind whatever terms to it, if it successfully is implemented at an ecosystem level across the board, across Web3, and it really does kind of kickstart the sort of like UX renaissance that we all wanted to, I think it becomes less of an important term, right? So then, like, I mean, we don't really want users to know what chain abstraction is. Like, they shouldn't be aware of what this means at all. Developers should maybe temporarily, like, maybe there's a future where like even they get to a point where like chain abstraction is at such a high level that it isn't really aware. Like, I'll say when you're building like Web2 applications today, like you're not really aware of like the specific abstractions that you're using to create this application. So like I think that there's a future where it becomes less important in terms of like who is aware of this term, like what does it mean, stuff like this, if it is successfully implemented. So I think that maybe that's a good indicator of like if we've achieved this well, as if the actual term itself kind of starts actually reducing in usage and people don't use it as much because it just works and it just like is there within the ecosystem, and it's just kind of a normal thing at this point. And it's not something that we need to like constantly talk about, right? So at least this is something that I think maybe could be an interesting future in terms of how you look at the term and the vertical overall.
Yeah, awesome, cool. And I know we're kind of about time right now, I believe. So maybe we give some final remarks, Tabasco, Rich, and then we can wrap it up.
yeah, I guess just some final thoughts from my side. First of all, really appreciate the XION team for hosting this, and it was great chatting with both with Rich and Burnt here. I think that, of course, we're quite familiar with both of you guys, and I think that there's a lot of cool work being done between all three of our particles. So quite excited about the future of chain abstraction. I think that I'm really started questions today. There's a lot of really good work being done within the vertical. Like I usually say, beyond kind of the names in this panel, I always recommend people to go check out Socket, Everclear, and Agoric and some other protocols that are building in chain abstraction. There's a lot of good work being done. I think 4Pillars just posted a really good report diving into it. Of course, we have a lot of good content about chain abstraction. And I think beyond this, if anybody is out at ECC, join Chain Abstraction Day by Nir and Agoric. It's going to be really good. That's about it from my side.
Yeah. I guess which one do you prefer? Burnt or Banksy? Which one? Just making sure.
You can call me Anthony. That's my real name, but
Okay.
probably Burnt.
All right, Burnt. Yeah, thank you for putting this together, you and the XION team. I don't think I've ever actually spoken to either of you before. You were Tabasco. So this is the first time, and I really enjoyed it. So thank you for putting this
I'll
together.
make sure to do more. I really enjoy this. So.
Yeah, that'd be great. And I guess things that the chat should probably do. I think for one, you should definitely read the most recent piece by Particle on the current map of the chain abstraction space. I think it gives a pretty good picture of what all the players in the space are doing. And yeah, I think that's a great starting point to sort of like learn more about chain abstraction. The next thing would be, I would suggest Hazel will kill me if I don't say this, but you should definitely join the UX Act Day. We have a couple panels and a bunch of players who are working in the wider crypto space to just improve UX. It won't only be chain abstraction. There'll be people just building sometimes wallets or just building lower level infrastructure, like messaging protocols. So definitely join that if you're going to be at ETC. And yeah, we'd love to see all of you guys in person.
Awesome. Yeah, I think we'll all be at ECC. So I hopefully we'll all at Abstraction Day as well. So it'll be very, very exciting. And I look forward to seeing all of you in person. Tabasco, I look forward to seeing you again in person and continuing the conversation. I'm sure that there are going to be so many more of these spaces and opportunities for us to work together. It is so exciting. And every team up here is doing awesome and genuinely, I really respect all you guys and the work that we're doing, because I think what we're doing is extremely important, especially in the capacity of just making crypto usable. However we get there, I think the northern light is the same, and the means to get to the end, are easy to kind of comprehend. And I think we're at that point now where we're really hitting this kind of pivotal point in crypto, and we have to do it all together. So it's really, really exciting, and I'm very happy that there's amazing people kind of doing it with us. So, Rich, Tabasco, everyone, Orbs, Particle, thank you so much. This was a great conversation. I know that there will be more, and I'll talk to everyone soon. Peace, everyone.
Yeah, catch you.
See you guys.